quinto día del coloquio Máquina Productora de Silencio, la improvisación en y más allá
in and beyond music and arts. So, welcome to this panel that's called Implementing. Originally, Ajay was going to moderate, but unfortunately, he was not able to do so. So, I'm going to be taking his place. So, we'll have the pleasure to moderate this panel. We will have three people, very special presenters that will open a lot of questions about impro and how do we deal with improvisation with humans and non-human agents, and what does this means, and from where what's the result of their explorations. We will start with David Rothberg. He's a musician and a philosopher who has written many books, including in at least White Bird Sing, Bog Music, and he has published many books, among including One Dark Night I Left My Silent House, which came out on ECM label, and along with he has also performed and recorded with Pauline Oliveros, Timothy Hill, Peter Gabriel, Ray Fury, Susan Vega. He has played with a number of important musicians, among Peter Gabriel, Susan Vega, Scanner, Elliot Sharp,
Kieran
Unguru,
Lanier,
Iva
Lucy
Vitova,
Vitkovaz,
Yaron Lanier, Lucy Vitkova, Jacob Young, Marlene Crispell, and Karnataka College of Percussion, among others. And in 2024, he won a Germany award as part of For the Birds in the category of best box set. Whale music and secret sounds of ponds. Offenberg is a distinguished professor at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Thank you, David, for being with us this morning. So I give you the floor.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Can everyone hear me?
yes.
Okay, so I'll talk for like 20 minutes and I'll play some examples. First, I'll play you this little 3-minute video sort of explaining how and why I'm making music with musicians who are not these guys are really old school, and there's so much wisdom you hear from them. Crickets and a whole distinguished ensemble. I've learned a lot from many musicians I've played with.
He ha aprendido mucho de muchos de los músicos con
In lyrebirds in Australia, beluga whales in Russia. It's very loud over here. This is late August. This is insect time. This is a hydrophone. It's an underwater microphone. It picks up sound underwater. And there can be all kinds of creatures. A whole human interest in noise as music, technologies that make washes of sounds, distorted guitars, electronic instruments. It all comes back to this world of bug sound. Our whole biology and culture evolved in the presence of all this. That might got someone the idea to start having a rhythm and shake something. These layers of rhythms. One is going, another's going, and then the katydids are going. There were bugs on this planet long before there are these more complicated creatures like birds and us. So this is like some of the oldest music you'll ever hear. Bugs are our ever-distant ancestors. We're hearing some connection to the voice of the ancestors. The insects remind us where we came from. Okay, so that was made a few years ago, in the middle of the pandemic when we weren't allowed to go anywhere. So it was like outside my house or meadows nearby. But now I'm going to tell you some things that no one's really seen before because I just came back from doing this project, which is going to try and play music along with one of the most little known and most amazing improvising birds in the world, the Blythe's reed warbler, which is called something like, I can tell you, it's called exactly Caricero de Blythe in Spain and Caricero de Blythe in Spanish in Latin America and these other languages. This is not a famous bird. It's kind of unknown, but you know, some people have recognized over the years it's just an amazing improvising character. And like this bird. They can sing for hours like this. Usually they sing between 12:30 in the morning and 2:30. This was one that the first time I ever heard this bird was 2016 in Finland, so it's light all the time in June. And it is like 3 in the morning. I sent this video to my friend Alexander Lieberman. He's famous for transcribing a bird song. People play them. Let's give a more bird example like here. Bird songs and transcribing all manner of things. And I asked him to transcribe this. He said it's the hardest thing he's ever tried to transcribe. Where did it go? Yeah, he said it's taken him months to do this, and he's not done. The video comes soon, but you see that this is a kind of different approach than I would want to play along with this bird. And he wanted to exactly, meticulously demonstrate what's going on. And this bird kind of plays a duet with itself, tone and the noise back and forth. This is just the first beginnings of this sound. And it's already, you see, what a meticulous effort of trying to get this down. You know, this isn't a very famous bird, but a handful of people are quite interested. I found this woman known as Flacco Weasel on YouTube. She's the world expert on this bird. Tends to like want to write down the sounds and it's like this amazing language, making sneaky videos. Came across this person. I said, I really have to find out who this is and go find this bird. And so I then learned she's a pretty interesting person. She's, I guess, what you'd call a neurodivergent person who kind of wears furry suits and lives on her own in this town in the middle of Estonia, and is obsessed with this bird, looking for these sounds and dancing along with it. She knows all these rhythms. There's no ornithologist who knows more about this bird, and she kind of has her own approach to dealing with life and birds and dressing up in furry suits and going out. And it took me many months to convince her that I should go visit and go out and find these birds with her, because she said, I don't have any friends. I'm just online all the time. I don't talk to anyone. I said, no, it's going to be really fun. So we went and did that. And then every night we go out from 12:30 to 2:30 and play along. And here is a kind of sonogram made in Amadeus of me playing along with this bird. And you see that, this sort of demonstrates, for me, it's an improvising process to go out and do this. But this sort of shows what start paying attention to the sound world of some other species. It's like 1 a.m. In a way, when I was out there listening to this, I didn't even want to join in. It kind of come on its own. And already, like, his own duet with himself. But it seemed like the whole world. But after a while, I still couldn't help myself. There's the clarinet start. That's right. It's very different to do this live in the middle of the night than taking the recording of the bird and just messing with it, playing with it in a concert situation. If anything, or any sound. But if you're doing this live, you have to think like, bird listening to me? Is he annoyed by this strange? Or does he just have to keep going? I don't know if you hear it as being kind of unusual, but this bird is very different from most birds you might want to play along with. It has so many different phrases, hundreds of different things that it does, and relentlessly sings them in the middle of the night when there's no other sound getting its way.
Can you speak a little bit louder? Because
Yeah,
we're having problems listening to
can you hear
you.
me now?
Yeah.
I turned it off. Yeah. So, so I just let this play for a while just to give you a sense of like to do something like this you kind of have to change your sense of time because here you have a bird that's going to sing for 2 or 3 hours without stopping, doing this whole composition that I would say is in between composition and improvisation. They don't do it the same each time. Each bird is quite different from the other ones, and Merlin Cotillard, otherwise known as Flacco Weasel, she is probably the one person in the world who can really tell the difference between these birds. She has a real sense of what's special about each one. And her approach, as you can see from those videos, is very different than, say, a scientist who would try and avoid giving the bird names, try and present diagrams like this instead of words and phrases. But she's the only one who really knows what or has a feel for the rhythms. She's looking for a certain kind of feel and rhythm and that the birds are making. And she's kind of discovered this creature and gone deep into their aesthetics. And, as an improviser, I want to kind of encounter this unfamiliar sound in the place where it is and just kind of see what happens. So we went out 3 nights. Each time I played different instruments, sometimes electronic, sometimes clarinet. And, it definitely changes you to spend time with a musician that has its own way of doing things. That's kind of you just need to spend time to get into it, and then you go back to your normal human world and you think, well, what am I going to do with this experience that I've obtained? And I think usually when I present this kind of material, I always present a little bit of this creature, a little bit of that, but in a way it would make more sense just to play for several hours the song of this improvising bird and try and join in with it. The same with the song of a humpback whale or nightingales, just to make people change their sense of time, slow down and be immersed in this unfamiliar sonic world and aesthetic. Each bird species, animal species that make music, of which there are many, really have an aesthetic sense that's evolved for reasons we don't always know. Even Charles Darwin knew about this in Descent of Man, 2 chapters about birds. He said particularly birds have a natural aesthetic sense. They appreciate beauty. That's why they've evolved beautiful feathers and beautiful songs. And we can appreciate that beauty too by spending time with it, by interacting with it. And if you believe that improvisation is a form of knowledge, or say, as Jason Moran said in an interview, it allows you to create music that can be created no other way. You can't just write this stuff down. You can't just transcribe it. You have to bring it to life. And that you can create an encounter you can't quite explain. I mean, many times I've played with human musicians and you make something you can't really talk about. You don't know what it is you did, and you just feel that something worked or it didn't work. And I think the reason I'm interested in playing along with these more than human, other than human musicians is to expand our sense of what music can be and gain influences and ideas from places that we might overlook. Like a bird no one has heard of that only sings in the middle of the night for a few weeks a year. This is something you have to go out and seek if you want to find it. So thank you for that presentation. I'm happy to talk about it, ask questions, play other things. So thanks.
Muchas gracias, David. Thank you very much for this super presentation.
Thanks.
Ok, entonces David tiene poco tiempo.
David has little
entonces
time
vamos a hacer hoy
available, so we're going to do something unusual, which is opening a space for a sort of Q&A session about or around his work. and later we will listen to the rest of the presenters. In the meanwhile, David, I want to tell you that I'm super excited to have you here. Liz, I have followed your work for a long time now. I have heard wave music, green band, uh, music that has inspired me a lot, and all these intellectual and artistic creations. So, will I give the floor?
Organizer with Ricardo. It's really wonderful to have you in the program, and I find your work really mind blowing. I wanted you to elaborate a bit on what you think this kind of work actually um, sort of confronts the more usual practices in improvisation with. What kinds of big questions do you think it poses?
Thank you for that question. Who was it asking it?
Benjamin.
Benjamin. Okay, thanks, Benjamin. Yes. So, I mean, the big question for me is what kind of knowledge does improvisation bring? Like you create something spontaneously based on your sense of practice and what you know about music, what you count as a successful musical experience, what is known and what is unknown. And you combine that with a world of sound that is really unknown because you can't ask these musicians what they're doing. Like, what is this bird possibly doing with this song that goes on for hours and hours? It is not necessary by any means. Most birds don't need to sing so much. Why is he doing this? And why does this particular bird have such a musical sounding song? And we can't even ask that question. Why are you doing that instead of this? Where does that come from? Whereas a human musician could say, here we'd play it like this with this rhythm. And so the very fact that music communicates things that we cannot explain makes it such a good thing to try out when you're crossing the line from one species to another. Like most human languages describe certain sounds made by birds and other animals as songs. We say, this is more like music than language because they're going on and on playing patterns and rhythms, and they probably don't have more to say than the bird that's just going, beep-boo. You know, they don't have more information to impart. They just have more complicated music. And it's fascinating to think that so much animal communication is closer to music than language. What do I mean by that? It's emotional. It's presenting patterns that have to be performed a certain way because there's rules that need to be followed rather than imparting a lot of information. And so, and also if something's music, it's much more accessible than if it's language. We just say, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. But if it's music, it's like, okay, do I get that rhythm? Can I relate to it? Can I interact with it? Can I join in? Can I just appreciate it? Some people think that you should not mess with what other animals are doing. Like, leave them alone. Their music is fine. Like, why mess with it? And also, it reminds me of an experience I had right before going to find this bird. I was in Albania recording this band of farmers that are musicians. They're all improvised and follow these kind of really old folk dance compositions, and they wanted me to play with them. I said, I don't know this music. And then my friend who's there says, they don't care. You don't have to know it. You just do it, and then you figure it out. Like they don't have this idea you know it or you don't know it. You just sort of play. The music's kind of part of life, and in a way, I think it is part of life for these birds. They're not born being able to sing like this. They have to learn. They learn throughout their lives more and more phrases, more and more songs. Birds have this ability to learn with sound, like people do. But a lot of other animals do not, like our close relatives, chimpanzees and other apes. You can't teach them to speak. That's why they will communicate with them. They're pointing at things. They're marking on boards and stuff. How come our closest relatives don't have this ability to learn with sound and birds do? That's something that interests scientists a lot, and it's fascinating to think about that. That there's something about our brains that's closer to birds than closer to chimpanzees. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a start.
Thank you, David. There's another question there? Or sorry, a couple of questions.
Dawn, there we go. My name's Anna. Thanks so much for your presentation. I was just wondering if you can tell me what qualifies the bird song as improvisation.
Yeah. A bird song would be improvisation if every time he sings it, it's different rather than the same. So that if we came hear the same bird the next night, he's not doing all the exact same things in the same order. That he's switching around, he's doing things differently. And
Yeah,
there are some birds and even some individuals in species that are more like composers than improvisers in that they always do it the same way.
Yeah, I feel like when we're listening to that particular bird, like when we see it in a human temporality, we can see it as improvisation, but whether that bird has a longer temporality, that would mean that it's not improvising, or that the song of that bird is longer, or is it listening to the things around it, or what do you imagine that it's engaging with around it, or is it engaging with you?
I mean, it's mostly believed that these birds with really long, complicated songs just get up there and perform them to sort of show, here I am. And in some species, like nightingales, they really interact with each other. With the Blythe-reed warblers, I've seen them when I first saw them. I saw many at the same time in Finland. They were very much interacting. But these nighttime performances were kind of solo. And once a bird started, it just kept going and going and going. Like you didn't get a sense it was so much responding to anything around. It was very hard to make them stop or do anything. You could play really loud next to them, they'd still keep going. And whether they change in reaction to what they hear, I'm not sure. I think we know nightingales do, humpback whales do sometimes, but a lot of birds do not. Mockingbirds are the most, virtuosic performers we have in our hemisphere. They tend to just get up and start singing, and it's unclear who's listening to them or why they keep going and going and going. Like less is known about how the sound changes in interaction. Song sparrows, which have like 10 to 25 phrases, they really listen to each other and compete with sound and go back and forth. And so like each bird has its own world in itself. But I would say to tell whether it's improvisation, every time they perform, is it the same or different? Like in Australia, you have lyrebirds, two species. The superb lyrebird always performs in its many imitations in a different order. The Albert's lyrebird tends to always do it in the same order. One's more like a composer. And so you could then say, well, are there more subtle differences in every performance? There probably are that we might not be able to pick up on.
Thank you, David. There's another question.
Hello. I was wondering, we were talking at this festival about the improvisation in fast motion and slow motion. And I was wondering, particularly in this project, would you consider that it's closer to an improvisation in slow motion or in fast motion, and why or why not?
You mean like as it is, slow motion, or what happens if you slow down?
No, as if the whole thing
Yeah.
that you're like producing, would you consider it is generally like a slow motion improvisation?
It doesn't seem any slower than playing with people. What's different is what the other musician is doing. But I've certainly slowed down and sped up different sounds in nature to get different effects. I think the slowing down might come in getting the sense that, okay, this performance is going to last 2 hours. You're going to hear this bird for 2 hours and we're going to play along, similar to like an Indian music concert that goes on for hours and hours at night. And maybe we're not used to something of that duration. Like there's a whole history of human music being either super fast or super slow that you sometimes have to adjust to once you realize that our conventions we expect are not going to be followed. Like many people think a song is 3 or 4 minutes long. Anything longer than that is slowed down or excessive or like the extended play version. And then certain symphonies I've heard that I think this is way too long. Like this is spread out. This doesn't have to be 90 minutes. But on the other hand, there's music that's going to take 1,000 years to perform. That every few years another note comes, and I think the sense of time, as we all know, varies tremendously what you're doing. I think all of us have had the experience listening to things or performing things where we think that 5 minutes is an hour or an hour is 5 minutes. Time, as experienced, is not always at the same pace. I mean, we know that certain birds can hear 5 times faster than we can. Tiny differences humans couldn't distinguish, they can distinguish. And similarly, someone like a fin whale makes one beat every 4 minutes. They go like, whoop, and 4 minutes later, whoop, and it's exactly regular, whoop, 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 if you speed it up. So they must have a sense of time really slowed down.
Thank you, David. There's a last question.
Thanks. Sorry, I came in late, so you may have talked about this, but and you touched on this in the last question, in the question, Anna's question. What I'm wondering is if you ever sense the sense of anxiety with playing music with the birds.
Sometimes my own anxiety, like why am I doing this? I think among the animals, not so much. Sometimes someone's going to fly away, they don't like it, or sometimes they might give you more of an alarm sound going, but not really so much. And if I was bothering anybody, I would stop and go away. Often around where I live here, I'm often playing with this catbird that has a nest in this bush next to my table outside. And this bird just comes out after dinner, ready to perform, like, let's go. And catbirds make a strange, dissonant, very improvised kind of music that most people don't even think is musical. So I spent a lot of time with that bird over the years. A few weeks ago, I noticed there was a dead baby catbird on the ground that had fallen out of the nest in there. And I wondered if the singing bird was going to perform differently with some sense of sorrow after this, but I didn't notice it. I didn't notice any real response to that. But this bird comes every year, like he's always around. So I think we kind of know each other, but I can't figure out what his music is about. It's still totally crazy, kind of elusive. And that has to do with human prejudice. We like things that are repetitive, regular, we can figure out. Things that are totally crazy. I've learned to relate to all kinds of things, When I was in school, I learned that music was organized sound or humanly organized sound. And I always thought that was a terrible definition. I would say music is, it's music if someone tells you it is. Consider this as music. Take it in as music. What are you going to get from it? You might not agree. You might not like it. You might not think that or this sound is music. But if someone tells you it is, they're asking you to consider it, at least for a little while, as musical. And that's kind of what I'm asking to do in this context. In the listening to bird sound this way, in the interacting with it, let's consider this as music for a little while and see what happens. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, David, very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for the great questions. I'm sticking around for the next, 45 minutes or so, whatever's coming next. So
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
So we're now following with Ángel Faraldo, and I am going to switch into Spanish. Ángel Faraldo es compositor e improvisador. Habitualmente trabaja
an improviser working with non-standard electronics and digital media. His production comprises improvisation, installation, and his focus on the systematic exploration of processes that maximize minimal resources, developing a performative and critical and ecological perspective. He also develops a career as a producer and sound engineer, specializing in classical, contemporary repertoire and live electronics, collaborating with renowned ensembles, composers, and festivals. He was artistic director of the Fondos Laboratory and Pompeu Fabra. He teaches electronic composition and currently he teaches electronic music composition at Centro Superior Catarina Gurska in Madrid. Angel holds a BA in music performance in the Royal Conservatory of Madrid and MA in sonology in the Institute of Sonology of The Hague, and a PhD from the Music Technology Group at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. So, welcome, Angel. Thanks a lot for the invitation and creating this space to share from the impossibility of being there. And of course, it would have been amazing, but it was not possible, unfortunately. Here in Barcelona, in Spain, we are finishing school courses, the academic timing, and now we are starting with other topics. So I didn't have any time for attending roundtables or colloquiums or anything of that sort, to think, to subjectify, and implement. Truth being told is for the next 20-25 minutes. I haven't prepared per se a playlist. I mean, I have some pictures that I might show, but I would rather keep it very simple, like a first person uh, a narrative. And I think that the best way of being in contact, now that we have a big distance among us, is to speak a little bit about myself. Although you may wonder, like, well, what can we learn from a person who's speaking about himself? I think especially how improvisation has been part of my life for the last 25 years that I've been improvising, and always moving along with other tasks related to music, whether it is composition or my work as a technology supporter for artists or sound artists. Always I've seen or I've heard something that has been invariable over the past 25 years, more or less. I have always kept improvising, and improvisation has always been a reflection of other aspects of my professional activity or personal activity. Maybe because it provides some power, or if it's a sort of compensation. And in all this adventure, I am I am a guitarist. I studied composition. I come from the classical music tradition and composition in classical music and contemporary music, so that's the academic background I come from. And for me, the fact of working with computers, with this digital mediation that started in my case around the year 2000, it's the topic that I have that comes along with this intervention, my relationship with technological improvisation. I think it's something that by the end of 2000s I developed my master's degree project in The Hague with a thesis called Bridging Opposites, where there was at least a series of elements, at least, I don't know, suspicious, that I needed to understand under a different light, at least from my personal experience, coming with a lot of vocal experience and instrumental. So there was this place, this kind of box that it's the computer. And that's where my interest emerged, my interest to understand how could I improvise genuinely with with computers. Right now I'm more at ease. 15 or 16 years ago I've been doing this, so I'm quite okay, I'm quite at ease. as a response, because at that moment in the years 2000 I was more concerned ideologically about the implications, the consequences of using a determined system. So we could talk about improvisation besides all the randomized chains that we might be using. And somehow I would say that, and I think that right now this is the moment that highlights all my message, or all the message that I want to highlight, that I want to convey. For me, this work is trying to work with machines, and now that I am part of the computer science department doing computational creativity, we are at a moment where artificial intelligence is permeating almost everything. And I would say that my work as a builder is not just incorporating machine listening or machine learning in my job. It will be more like learning to listen to the machine, and leave that time, different times, uh, a different timing compared to what David was mentioning, the animal timing. I think I'm more into the machine timing. But at the end of the day, it's just leaving the human timing, any opportunity to adjust ourselves to a different timing that transcends the pulse of humanity. I think that's an amazing opportunity, at least to get to know one another better. So I'm just revolving around the same topic. When I get to Holland, I had the chance to improvise with technology, and improvising with technology is a vocation. It's improvising with as a duo, as a quartet with other people, other humans, and I devoted some years, some good years, to work in real time with instruments. I work with flute players. This I don't know, vital circumstances. I have had many consecutive projects where my colleagues were playing the flute, and in any case, I was particularly interested at that very moment in using computers to create a transformation, a mutual transformation of the encounter, like having an acoustic instrument, but also having an assembled acoustic musicality, and at the same time creating something new through machines. And I was relying that the people who were playing with me were also on that symphony. Throughout the time conducting this practice, by the way, John Ryan was my director in Amsterdam. I was living there for a long time. He was one of the pillars of this timing for the instrumental electroacoustic in Amsterdam. And there we were doing a lot of improvised music with technology. And a big part of that music was processing in real time the sound of instruments, trying to improvise, trying to reach a language. For me, there were a lot of limitations from the very beginning, a lot of problems with the idea of sampling, mixing, or remixing colleagues. How can we appropriate a material or a sound material that has passed through a time, or that has happened almost immediately? How do we reappropriate these? How can we use this material as genuine improvisation in a direct context? And how can we, if we decide not to do it, if we can, what can we do with sampling if we can create a discourse or a speech that's particularly interesting, and not just a cosmetic or hermetic, like a way of magnifying the instrumental sounds that we are collecting. That's what I wanted to say when I talked about my uh, my concerns about the political elements some 15, 16 years ago, when it came to talking about equality, like electronic music such as mine, or improvised music with acoustic instruments, when we talk in terms of presence, directionality, focus, bodies, uh, and the mediation, and not necessarily on the stage. So all these type of questions made me abandon uh, process processed sound and moving into the tough nucleus of computer music that is trying to avoid any possibility of mimesis and relationship with nature, actually avoiding the synthesis of uh, physical explanations like the pendular movement and a series of harmonizations. So I moved into a different place of number crunching, trying to apply certain concepts of algorithmic composition, hardcore life in an improvised manner. And paradoxically, to try to make this type of methods that are taken from the algorithmic improvisation allowed me what using different sources of sound haven't allowed me at that time, which is making a decision in very small, in very little time, in a very short time, because it means altering, having a dialogue, and improvising at the end of the day with certain autonomy. Looking forward to that autonomy, that in order to create a speech. This has been one of the topics that I have heard. One of my topics during 2009. I developed a digital synthesizer called Mesa. It was musical instrument. It was something like a musical instrument for free improvisation, and that was one of the elements that were particularly interesting. And even a decade later, I used that instrument occasionally. And even though at the time it was part of concept test for an algorithm, for a composition, they could have an entrance or a space in improvisation, and these presuppositions right now 15 years later are now more relaxed. The luthier part that of myself, that was a big part of me in the beginning, is now banished, and right now I'm only an improviser musician playing an instrument without the need of actually worrying about presuppositions or basic presuppositions of a musical system. Just to explain you a little bit what I was trying at the time is something, or was something, related to the stochastic system proposed by Stomakis. It had a lot of resonation with me, although it's not inspired in the booking of Xenakis or the machine's dioramics of Daphne. The idea of drawing sounds, or the possibility of introducing a sound or creating sound with the hands. It's a key thing, playing with the hands, with your fingers, in a fastest way possible, or creating sound in something that could mean a sound response. I have 8 potentiometers in the MIDI that help me to draw 8 points of a period, to draw a period of an oscillation with the previous parameters previously decided by the improviser, who was me. So I was creating an undulation, a triangular undulation, or a sinusoidal undulation. And maybe you can imagine that the sound, or the natural sound and high fidelity, was not part of my fundamental objectives. It was more the speed, the possibility of changing one pitch with a single gesture and moving to a different melodic rhythm or melodic sequence. I wanted to play with that, so it was an obsession for the gesture, recovering the physical gesture, because while you're working with computers and working with the improvisational decision making that was quite randomized, just to make you try to imagine how the machine was going to respond to my improvisation, considering certain previous parameters, like what was the range or a speed, in order to reproduce a sequence that were the same pitches that were representing the pitch of the curve sound, or maybe an evolving sound, etc. So I was trying to work different parameters of the sound morphology from a single gesture and give it ranges and speeds, basically. So it was a whole heterophonic system, and using in improvised music contexts. I was also using multi-channel stereo music, and that's it. I've been doing improvisation for a long time. I've done a lot of concerts during my years in Amsterdam. From 2006 and 2014, I came to Barcelona working with that instrument, also as a soloist, and also a lot of work in assemble of instruments, because I'm sorry, in context of a composition or sound painting that it's been used a lot of in Spain as a sort of composition, and it's a possibility of working the spontaneity, working with digital instruments. And after that, after some years working just in that context, on a digital context, I came to Barcelona, and the excuse was studying a PhD in musical technology. And my PhD didn't have much to do with creation. It was more in the realm of musicology assisted by computers. So I was trying to study tonal systems in electronic music, in club music, aided by digital methods. So from there, I started to develop some listening systems, uh, recognizing tonal and rhythmic systems, and I spent a number of years, 5 years more specifically, from 2014 to 2019 or 2018, working in this context. And as I was telling you before, there was not a lot of improvisation. Music was the kind of music of used in a different context, and for that reason, I I stopped working with computers in order to make improvised music and other big topics that I'm interested since the year 2000. It's the feedback as a way of listening, as an excuse to listen to the environment. And particularly since the year 2010, I have developed a continuous work with mixers, mixing boards, depending on the context. So it's basically an electronic oscillator built from feedback, 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 from feed electronic equipment that was not originally designed for this. So I have a lot of work with a no input mixer or regular mixers, and since I've been working in an academic context, I've been checking or I've been revising computational efforts. And so now I was trying to move away from the digital context, and I have now worked with input mixer, but with a growing obsession towards going back to play with my fingers, with my hands, and listen with my hands. I am a guitarist, that's my original formation. I'm a classical guitarist. So even if in my formative years, maybe it will be a matter of psychoanalysis if my moving into electronic music was a sort of frustration with a lack of volume, without an amplification device, that need of having a higher sound, which can be done with amplified music. You can assume that volume or that the force of the sound is unlinked to the level of effort that we make. So I don't know. It's one of the questions that emerge in my mind, how things are supposed to sound. But what's the implication with what we are playing? A salon can have a certain volume, but I think that since 2015 I haven't used a speaker, a conventional speaker with a system of amplification of sound. Basically, I used something that the first clear reference is the rainforest of Tudor, with these transductors with which a sound was transformed. It was like a sound sculpture, a translucent speakers of contact. And I can tell you, since 2015, more or less, I've been working with crystal cups, objects that I found on a daily basis that help me create resonation, uh, or in order to amplify, transform, and filter the electronic sound that I work with. So for me, it's curious, it's peculiar, the promise of electronic music and artificial intelligence. In my particular case, it has led me to look for artificial intelligence that's related to touch, the possibility of filtering through the sense of touch, and that other listening capability that I think is relevant when we work in context of improvisation. But when it comes to context of chaotic machines, feedback machines that are not always responding the same way, it's like learning to hear the machine, learning to hear how the material is evolving, and learning from like Chalabi, that at some context could be a little too theoretical, but that instrumentalizing composition, that is letting that a system with algorithms can do whatever, if I can say that with that word, and to honor that moment that won't be repeated any other time. So I am going to share with you for a moment at least. I'm going to share my screen to share a couple of pictures that will be helpful to illustrate the whole thing a little better. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. I hope you can see the picture. This is a concert in the past February in Castellón. It's a province in the southern part of Barcelona. And I just wanted to illustrate. It's a set with objects and a range of with a small transductor. There's my mouse moving over there. So it's the fundamental idea of the set. I don't know if I could share another picture just to show you the general setup. Here is another picture with the same setup. The general idea here of it's a little stylized, but I have some Bluetooth speakers, blades. So it's a sort of a defense of the lo-fi, low quality, so to speak. But at the same time, it's a place for making electronic music, improvised electronic music. And I think that's the place where I'm right now. I want to find a new instrumental vocation that can lead me somewhere new that I am not quite aware right now. So I will just make a small summary of some sort of somehow like a conclusion that maybe throughout these years, speaking with the media, with improvisation, with technology, mainly digital, has I think it was important at some point. One point is the notion of skill when it comes to the instrumentist or the musician. It's a skill, a manual skill, but also the auditive skill, being able to filtrate or to create with your hands. And it has been a road back in my well throughout these years. And another skill that I find it's relevant for digital musicians is being prepared to adapt to every situation and to program a necessary part of the skill of a digital musician, the possibility of creating a patch, a program, depending on the explicit conditions of the concert, whether if it's the number of musicians, the disposition or the display of the musicians. These are elements that are always changing. And then again, when my little boxes, cardboard boxes, actually my performance tends to start with I mean an hour before the concert, looking for sounding materials like boxes, cardboard boxes, in the surroundings of the facility where I'm going to improvise. So I take some elements from the street to my improvisation to my improvisation set, and I think I will leave it here. It's peculiar how in a conversation about technology, my position is a little naive and maybe sort of suspicious or suspecting from the capacity, the capabilities of machine learning to develop free improvised work or music. So, well, thanks for listening to me.
Vamos entonces con Kimber Cyber antes de abrir el diálogo.
Let's continue with Kimber Cider.
Kimber Cyber es una cuentacuentos multifacética.
Kimber Cider is a documentalist, is a multimodal storyteller, documentary filmmaker, artist director of the Guelph Film Festival, and a human animal eco scholar specializing in communication, performance, and the ways in which humans engage and perceive the more than human world, particularly plants and animals. Sider holds degrees in theater and film, specializing in writing and directing, as well as a PhD in theater performance from the University of Guelph. The academic writing of Siders has been published in TDR, the Drama Review, and Canadian Theatre Review. And she is a lecturer in communication arts at the University of Waterloo. Uh, Her most known work is the documentary Chasing Canada. Uh, it follows her journey across Canada with her horse Katrina. So welcome, Kimber. Great to have you here.
The duration
Muchas gracias.
of my talk today. So as you heard, good morning, everybody. My name is Kimber Sider. I'm joining you today from Guelph, Ontario, Canada, on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe peoples, specifically the traditional lands of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation on Between the Lakes Purchase Number 3 Treaty Territory. Today, as my slide suggests, I'm going to be talking about quiet agency, improvisation, and equine individuality. I will be talking about interspecies collaboration and how improvisation, communication, and quote-unquote failure show up in these spaces. The project that I'll be focusing on and drawing my examples from is called Katrina. Katrina is both the name of my horse, which in my bio, we went across Canada together in 2008, and it is also the title of my media installation, which I was invited to create for Supercrawl 2023, and you see Katrina here on the screen. Supercrawl is an outdoor arts festival which takes place in downtown Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Hamilton is a large urban center outside of Toronto, about an hour away, with a vibrant downtown core, and it's just west of Toronto and south of Guelph. This media installation focused on using video and audio design to encourage a human audience to recognize a horse, Katrina, as a unique individual and to invite them into a more intimate understanding of equine communication and performance in an everyday sense and animal agency. So here we have some photos from the installation. The videos that I created with filmmaker Dustin Seabrook for this event were showcased on 3 sides of a digital media truck, which you see in a few of the photos here. The main pieces were shown on the larger rectangular side screens and included audio. Both side screens are the same, and then the square back screen is silent and offering a different view. On the left image, even though those images sort of look like they're connected, they're actually not. In this piece, I explored how performance could be used to highlight the agency and individuality of a single animal actor, Katrina, my equine companion of 16 years. However, the delivery and execution of this work proved to be more complex. When the final installation was released into the wild of an urban human-centric space, Katrina was admired, objectified, and/or ignored by the passing audience. Was she acknowledged as an individual? Or did the deep history of metaphorizing her body override the nuances of her being? Could the audience perceive the individual beyond the mediatized dissemination? Could they recognize the subtleties of her character and all of her improvised agency? How she engaged in the co-creation of this piece? So often in art, animals, and especially horses, are included as metaphors. Their bodies are used to represent freedom and/or beauty in an anthropocentric sense. They are used to teach us humans more about our human selves. They are rarely included as unique individuals, empowered with their own agency, interests, and objectives. Horses are one of the most predominantly depicted animals in popular culture. Horses represent a significant portion of what Una Shideri and Shoni Enlow refer to as a cultural animal unconscious, a web of ideas and images circulating around us, offering clarifications, mystifications, and inspirations. It's primarily from this unconsciousness that people build their frame of knowledge regarding an animal, especially if they have limited access to interactions with any individuals of that species. Horses are largely presented as noble, kind, free-spirited, wild but tame, and sharing a unique relationship with humans. Equestrian theater demonstrates the appeal of equine affinity by relying on romanticized depictions of horses to draw mass audiences to their performances. Though these idealized creations can hold elements of equine experience, there are many other aspects that are rarely demonstrated, leaving people who have had little first-hand interaction with live, unscripted horses unaware of the specific nuances involved. Human-animal scholar Leslie Irvine writes, if people simply projected onto animals the qualities that they wanted them to have, then any animal would make a good companion. While this is true, this also does not mean that humans always see animals in all of their complexities, or recognize the variety of ways that they articulate self and perspective. And as such, when placed in artistic spaces, animals, and especially horses, are often objectified and projected upon. The real individual ceases to exist, and all that remains is the metaphor. This metaphorical framing overrides their personalities and perspectives, encouraging humans to see each animal as fixed and interchangeable with the next. But as Ina Shaduri also writes, animals are not figments of our imaginations. They have real lives as rich and valuable as our own. How can we push back against this interspecies injustice and learn to honor animals in their own light? Is it possible to destabilize the anthropocentric gaze within a creative act? Or does the act of framing an animal in performance inherently override the individuality of that animal? To give you a bit of a feel for this project, I'm going to show you part of the video installation for Katrina. If everything works with this clip, pay attention to the audio as well as the video. These two elements of the pieces are interconnected, but work in independent ways to highlight different aspects of Katrina's communication and performance. This is the intro to the project, and I just realized I don't think I clicked the right thing when I shared, so I'm going to stop sharing and reshare. Oh, we're good. Okay, great. Okay, here we go for the clip. Katrina has a really impressive ability to hit her marks when we're working together. Anytime I film with her, she seems to know the frame better than I do. This shot happened right after we called action on our first day of filming. She stepped fully into the frame from where she'd been off spraying and laid down to roll, something she really rarely does in the company of humans. Creative collaboration. Very intentionally, nothing happens in this video, as this quote-unquote nothing allows space for attunement to detail. To attune oneself to the subtleties of Katrina's movements and sounds. The performative expectations placed on horses are often ones of action. We expect them to react, to be dramatic, to run, to buck, to seek validation from humans. But with a daily interaction with horses, while they may do all of these things for brief periods of time, most of their day is spent quietly grazing, ideally in a herd. They rarely whinny unless calling to a friend, despite what most Westerns you may have watched suggest. But they do have a rich and nuanced soundtrack to their lives. However, these soundtracks are very subtle. They are improvisational. They are built on an interspecies community. They are the sounds of breath, chewing, blowing, tearing of blades of grass, stamping of feet to shake off flies, and the brushing of their bodies through tall grasses, if they're lucky enough to live in a dynamic pasture. They are the sounds of the birds and insects around them, who mingle through the meadows and forage alongside them, and the wind through the trees. In our modern urban environments, few people get to experience just hanging out with an individual horse or a herd, going about their day, even equestrians rarely spend protracted periods of time just horsing. These improvisatory performances and the value of this equine-centric space of nothing happening are outside of most of humans' repertoire. The focus of the installation was to show a moment in Katrina's regular life. So all that Katrina was asked to do was graze in a field that she normally inhabits in the summer. The creation of this work was highly improvisational, inviting Katrina to collaborate and influence in the creation. All we were looking for was a single shot in a fixed frame of Katrina grazing to give the audience time to pay attention to the quote-unquote nothing that was happening, time to focus on her as an individual horse, to tap into the nuances of her movements, and to hear the softer communication of her being. My objective in using video and performance as my modalities was to create a space in which Katrina could be herself, as she shows up daily within our interspecies relationship, and to invite humans into this intimate space of knowing an individual horse, or at least to offer a glimpse. Video allowed me to build a world into Katrina's world, rather than to transplant her into the more humanist space of the exhibit, which she also would have hated. She really likes being the center of attention, but she also hates chaos in crowds. This also allowed me to remove humans from the performance, to center Katrina fully, though the camera still enacts a human gaze. So now I'm going to share with you a longer clip from the performance. You may have noticed in that clip that Katrina felt the best way to start this project was to walk on screen, line her butt up to the camera, and pee. Katrina brought her own flair and blocking to this project at every stage, including saying no to our first attempts at filming, and being unwilling to stay in the frame for more than a minute at a time before cantering across 100 acres to go find her herd, and I'll talk more about that later. The artist's notes for the work read, "Meet Katrina, Katrina is a confident leader who excels at setting healthy boundaries in her relationships. She's an exceptional communicator who's never short on opinions. She loves a good snack and a wander as long as she gets some say in the plans. Also, Katrina is a horse. The notes go on to offer some critical framing while recognizing the popular context of the supercrawl event. So often in art, animals, and especially horses, are included as metaphors. Their bodies are used to represent freedom or beauty in an anthropocentric sense. They are rarely included as unique individuals, empowered with their own agency, interests, and objectives. This metaphorical framing overrides their individual personalities and perspectives, encouraging humans to see each animal as fixed and interchangeable with the next. Katrina, the installation, and the individual, invites you to step away from this framing and see her in a personal light. Capturing Katrina's performance was very straightforward, a simple, continuous shot where Katrina wanders in and out of frame as she grazes. You may have noticed in the first clips that when Katrina is on screen, the audio is natural. The inherent mix of one mic in a field capturing her and all that is around her. However, when Katrina is off screen, we have designed the audio with the intention of heightening her little sounds. Each footfall, chew, blow, and nicker is more pronounced and placed directly in your space as the audience. She sounds like she's right next to you, offering a new intimate relationality with an individual horse and drawing awareness to the communication that is often missed. Now I'm going to show you a second clip. This time both screens are present. Note how your mind plays with the audio and images. Which aspects claim your focus and why? How do you attune? And keep in mind that the audio is only connected to the rectangular screen. The square screen is actually silent. Humans tend to be very visually dominant species, so when there is visual action, for those with sight, that stimulus tends to take precedent. So when there is less action in the field, the audience is brought into a different sensory experience based on sound. But when you watch both screens together, you make connections between the heightened sound and the square images of Katrina, which are not actually there. This creates moments of cognitive dissonance that encourages the viewer to break down the connections that they're making between sound and gesture, and ideally to pay attention to both in ways that they may have overlooked when the media is synced and/or natural. These are all of my best laid plans for this project. However, once placed in the urban downtown environment of Supercrawl, everything about the framing changed. There are two very different experiences of failure in this work. The first one occurred on our first day of filming. Though I was asking Katrina to do the simplest thing that I'd ever asked her to do on film, graze in a field, and I filmed her a lot, I was asking too much, and here's how the first shot actually went. In this first day of filming, every shot went like this. We spent 2 hours. We would set up the shot. Katrina would graze for a moment, and then she would canter off across 100 acres looking for her herd. I spent 2 hours walking back and forth across that 100 acres, trying to catch her or getting her back, trying to negotiate with her to at least mix up her filming approach, if not to graze as requested. On that first day, Katrina and I had very different ideas about our priorities in that moment. Mine was to get some sort of usable footage, even if it didn't look as I had originally intended, and hers was to ensure that her boys, the geldings of her herd, weren't getting into trouble without her. Katrina lives outside with 50 other horses on between 100 and 150 acres at any given time. Failure is so often part of relationships, and perhaps the most exciting part of improvisatory collaborations, especially in interspecies contexts, though it's not often viewed as such. When talking about interspecies collaborations, failure is where animal agency shines, as failure in interspecies engagements is so often viewed as any moment in which animal interests override human objectives. It was very clear on this first day that my ideas did not align with Katrina's. And for a project focused on highlighting the agency of Katrina, Katrina was reminding me that she always has opinions, and I can either work with them or not get anything that I want. So on the second session, we adapted to the specifics of her performance rider. We brought her herd with us. Her two best friends were standing just off screen. And once that concern was met, Katrina was relaxed and intrigued. She quickly became very interested in collaborating and easily gave us 10 minutes of her grazing in and out of the frame, wandering between me on one side and her gelding buddies on the other, greatly exceeding my hopes for how she would engage with this creation. This herd-based collaboration allowed for more dynamic footage than anything we likely would have gotten on day one without her companions involved, and her collaboration enhanced the creation that she wandered in and out and made the filming more dynamic. She changed her blocking, she played with the frame and camera, and she was intrigued by the process. So this failure eventually became a really positive moment of our collaboration. The second area of failure in this process was how the dominant conventions changed all my intentions the moment I placed the installation in the festival. To give you a feel for the actual festival, here's a clip of the truck and how it was situated within the festival. Super closes a main street and sets up 2 stages at either end with numerous smaller stages, markets, and installations running the blocks in between. And the event runs for 3 days from around noon to midnight each day. Watching the audience engage with the truck was fascinating. Reactions ranged from complete indifference as folks passed by, to stopping and viewing with the intended focus, and wilder choices, such as the drunken chanting of horse truck," by a group of men headed to the next stage, to selfie opportunities, and folks slapping Katrina's booty as it came up on the screen, objectifying her in exactly the ways the installation was meant to unpack. For many, Katrina became an object the second she was placed on the screen. With the improvisation displaced, filming is a highly unimprovised act outside of the live filming once it's edited and put together. The audience could not perceive Katrina's agency in the same way. Any agency that she was afforded in the filming and in her performance on the day was negated by the positionality of how the projections landed in the humanist space of this public event. Would she have been equally objectified if she had physically attended the event, her body claimed by humanist and patriarchal modes of entitlement and control through touch? In a different space, one more established for critical and reflection, would the same videos be viewed differently? Or does the humanism of this artistic space run too deeply? We humans have placed animals in these positions by forgetting or never knowing how to hear their stories and recognize their agency. Animals are lacking these aspects of self only insofar that we humans do not allow them these attributes and/or do not recognize or know how to recognize their stories, offers, and impacts. No matter how loudly an individual claims voice and agency, if those around them continue to overlook their ways of speaking or refuse to acknowledge the impact or possibility of their agency, then these messages become lost and the individual is still left at a disadvantage. Philosopher David Abram asks, how could we ever become so deaf to these other voices that non-human nature now seems devoid of meaning besides that which we choose to give it? Despite our lack of attunement to animal ways of speaking and being in the world, we can learn to recognize all the ways that one may speak without words. This is not to say that everyone who encountered Katrina at Supercrawl was unattuned to her communication and performance. Many stopped to watch the entire reel on both screens, actively opening themselves up to the experience. It was the most engaged with installation of the event. Even if this engagement started with a selfie opportunity, this pausing creates space to learn about Katrina. But those individuals who noted the nuances of Katrina in this act were likely already primed to listen. So the question that I continue to ponder is, in this time of ecological devastation, how can we invite those who are unconditioned to interspecies agency to hear and care? Can media and performance play a role, or is the humanist framing just too deep? Perhaps a human guide is needed to walk others through this adjustment and attunement, to point at the sensory communication that's being missed, which I've also explored in other projects. So the folks that are new to this discernment may hone their perceptions. But of course, first, in order to get that attunement, you have to care. Even if Katrina, the installation, in many ways failed to reach my goals for reception, perhaps it planted the seeds of awareness, at least for those who paused to try and understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kimber, for this wonderful presentation. Now we're going to have some Q&A time. ¿Hay alguien que quiera plantear una pregunta, comentario a Ángel o Kimber? Bueno, mientras tanto, en lo que sale de la timidez.
Well, while we wait for interventions, it was really interesting, the intervention of Ángel. Many fascinating things were mentioned, and I truly resonate with your work, with your capability of improvising, with your capacity to use machines. It was somehow subversive to think about a sound and to think about music in a more ludic way. But it was interesting, the finding, the thing of the finding. Also with you, Kimber, in the sense of there is an openness to what can happen. In the case of Ángel, you were saying that before the concerts you were there ready to see, like picking up elements from the street, elements from the surroundings, and you're not really sure how that's going to work out, and yet you use it. I have done that also, and it's quite interesting. And I also think that in the case of Kimber, there is something with the finding, letting things happen. In the case of Katrina, and yeah, I just wanted to mention that you make me think a lot about this text of Derrida, the animal, because there Derrida, what he does is to understand the animal as a generic entity that becomes universal even though animals are super different among themselves, but they are taken as universal figures or as universal entities to no, in this case it's not just a horse, it's Katrina. We're watching Katrina, not just a general horse. We have a question here. Hello. Thanks a lot, Kimber. I wanted to make a comment. First, it was awesome to watch Katrina, and I'm not really sure how to start. I'm not sure I can find the specific words to convey how it feels seeing the life and the rhythm of other lives that are non-human. You said something that made me wonder, which is how can we make this performance of Katrina? And the first step was you need to care. So I don't know what to say, but I just wanted to share a little bit the experience. Before, I was not so much aware of the animal part in my life. I mean, animals were there, they are present, they have their own essence, their own soul, they're individuals. And because, well, now I have dogs, I am now perceiving animals in a different way, and it's sometimes overwhelming to feel them so much or to care that much. It can be painful at some point. It's not just watching them by afar, it's watching and feeling them, and also within a human society where they are not given a space, where they are not given a place, where they are sometimes not even given the dignity. And recently, I was feeling all of this, and there was a moment where I was in a place where a horse was uh, being mistreated, and it took me a long time to actually gain the the need to watch horses again, because it reminded me of that moment when I saw this horse being mistreated, and it was super painful to watch other horses. So I think maybe I wanted to ask how how can we care? How can we make ourselves care and start seeing these animals, or Katrina, or other animals, but also at the same time dealing with the pain and the beauty, and all the feelings that can be evoked by these animals. In this case, Katrina. How do you deal with these stories or so much complicated situations that are faced by animals? So maybe that's my question. Just to round up, like, how do we care? Esa es una pregunta muy importante. Cuando te abres
To this
a
type of empathy and attunement, that yeah, it's not all sunny. There's a lot of beauty and magic and personality and quirk and humor in other non-human beings. But then there's also, yeah, you'll see a lot of death, a lot of pain as well. But I think it also is part of that, and something that humans are not great at, especially at least within like the human culture that I'm most familiar with within North America, that we avoid death, and we kind of don't necessarily know how to respond to it and roll with it, and honor kind of the beauty that's within that as well, and the momentary glimpses that that those things go hand in hand. So I find that the more we sort of open ourselves up to it, and the moment more we also notice those moments of sadness. I mean, it's harder when you're seeing a human abuse another animal as opposed to just the normal fluctuations that may happen in nature. And I'm not good at that one, and I don't think we ever should become good at that one, because then we're really not acknowledging the other being. But I think within the flows of nature and life, and I think there is something to be said about being open to that and seeing it, and also reflecting on perhaps we hold on too tightly at times to we must live at all cost, and that there's various things within human culture that doesn't prime us for those flows, and not to say that they're not still devastating, but I think there are different ways that we can engage with them, and learn how to feel things and move through them, because that is something that horses really do excel at, especially as having intense moments or intense griefs or having things, but then moving through them and being present, and those things I think can help with it. And I think to get people to care, to speak to the other part of your question, um, I think we're good at this when we're kids and we learn it. We get conditioned out of it. I have a 4-year-old nephew, and he sees everything, and he's talking about every bug, and he's not necessarily always empathizing with them because some of them bite him, and he doesn't like that. But he's seeing them, and we very much get conditioned to not pay attention. And with my students, and of course I teach on interspecies engagements, part of it is that they have to just go out and watch any sort of animal outside in nature and share environment with them, and they have to do that 3 times in a semester, and it's amazing how much they all of a sudden just start to notice everybody around them. And I think it's easier to start to notice the kind of cute animals that we tend to care about more, but then that can also be a gateway into recognizing everybody else too, the bugs, the individuals we may not enjoy so much, but also have dynamic lives alongside us. So I think there's different ways of doing it, and I think it is an art form to learn to be open, and flow with these experiences, but not be crushed under the weight of the complexities. But if we also open ourselves up, then we see a lot more of the magic and beauty and communication, and I think that can also help with the grief. So I think it is a balance to those things. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. There's another question. There's a couple of questions
Ah,
here.
bueno, antes que nada, pues yo quería como...
Well, beforehand, I wanted to congratulate all of you because it made me question or interrogate myself on how much the world of people have an influence on the act of improvisation, but also the levels of improvisation. How much other animals or other beings, sentient beings, are present or can have a say. I don't know how to say this because it's like such a human way of speaking, but how people within improvisation realm find it hard to put this into words. And I think that the power of reflection when we see scenes like this, like in the case of Katrina, it's watching her in her nature. I couldn't stop watching the video, listening to what was happening in terms of sound, and wondering how much the actions of Katrina have to do with the act of improvisation. Because improvising has, or necessarily has to have a human context, uh, maybe, or not, I don't know. Like you have something in mind and then you conduct that something that you have in mind. So I was just wondering the role of Katrina or of other sentient animals in the act of improvisation. And on the other hand is, as an open question, what's the what's the role of human beings or people in improvisation in all this context?
There, Angela.
Let's
Okay.
hear another question. Sorry, before answering back.
Sure.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Hello,
Eh,
thanks a lot. I think the combination of these three interventions was really good. There are so many things we have to reflect upon. I wanted to ask you, Angel, if you could choose a piece, a sound piece, in order to listen to your music, something that can be representative, that you find representative, because it has been really interesting to hear the tension or to be present in this tension that we are all feeling when it comes to machines. And I think that you have been quite suggestive when it comes to the role of machines in improvisation, when it comes to innovation and your ways of creating. So I was curious to listen to your creation. Actually, I find it interesting that you haven't thought of a fragment to share. Maybe it's because of the importance, conceptually, the tension that I'm describing. So I was just wondering if you could share something. And also, Kimber, congratulations. We want to continue this conversation later on. I don't know if I understood this correctly. The previous question is not going to be answered. Oh, no, no, no. It's just that we wanted to take a couple of questions before you could start providing your answers. Perdón, es que me había confundido, pero sí,
En relación a esta pregunta,
en regarding this question, sometimes I find it hard to share some recordings of my work or when I'm defending improvised music with machines, because it's uh, it's an old discussion, it's an old argument. I haven't recorded a lot of my work throughout my past 25 years of work. My need is more towards touch and contact. I think these are very important elements when it comes to live work rather than recording. And on that regard, this could be tricky because I could choose my best moments. And yeah, my best moments are. I have done that before, and I can give you a couple of references. In my Bandcamp, there is accessible material with me, which is my digital instrument, also with my mixing machine, this Meta mixing machine, which is using a table. So I use also synthesizers. So my Bandcamp is uh, bandcamp.com. You can find there my discography. There are some published albums, maybe some LPs. You can write to me so I can share you some physical material. Thank you. Kimber?
Would you like to respond the question?
Yeah,
Um,
I guess I can speak to the question around improvisation in humans versus animals and how that works. Um, I think with so many things that we often say that the human is the starting point, or that only humans do this, or it's very different when humans do it. It's often a difference in degree rather than kind. So humans tend to frame things differently. I am not. I have done improvisatory music with IC. I did all of my graduate school student work with the Institute in many ways, and I was a documentary filmmaker with the Institute for many years. Um, so I've definitely witnessed a lot of improvisational music and things like that. And there's definitely, I would say, and maybe Angel can speak to this as well, that there are human improvisers that go in with a very clear intention of where you're starting and where you're going. And then there's also collaborations that just start in the space, in the moment. And the start is just the beings coming together, and that there isn't necessarily a trajectory. There's certain defining qualities, which I would say is the same within the context of Katrina on the day, that we've gone to a specific location, in this case a field, and we've said this is the start because we were filming, but there, it started the moment I showed up on the property. It started many times before, and the same with human musicians. It started sort of like Angel talked about, like within the collecting of objects, even if the audience is not present there. That's when the improvisation actually started. And sometimes an audience is more present, and sometimes an audience is less present. Sometimes we're stepping out and saying, this is the performance, and at other times, the performance and the audience might just be the people involved. So I think in so many of these things, improvisation at its basis is about connection, it's about communication, and those things can happen in many forms, whether they're electronic, whether they're AI, whether they're human, whether they're non-human animals, whether they're sentient, and it's often just how we are framing it. And yes, humans are the ones that are going out of their way to say, this is the performance, this is the moment. But these things run throughout life in so many different dynamics. And that if you boil it down, and I would say, like, I'm a performance scholar, and improvisation is a lot of what I use, but at its foundation, performance is just a form of communication. And I focus mostly on nonverbal communication, and those performances go on all the time. But we can also take it into an artist space and say, I want you to focus more here and have this moment. Angel, I don't know if you want to add on to anything in there.
Sí, bueno, incluso yo pensaba, en verdad, mi trabajo se restringe o sea, a trabajar con otros humanos mayormente y sí que la mediación tecnológica creo que, bueno, que misteriosamente tiene como muchos puntos de contacto con, bueno, con ese lugar, con esa escucha expandida digamos, que se abre a un lugar desconocido. Al final creo que pueda tener como que ver con eso esencialmente. Y, y tirando un poco de este hilo, yo justamente mañana y pasado estaré en un taller, impartiendo un taller de improvisación y hay algo también, ¿no? O sea, hablamos de improvisación y hablamos del factor humano y yo de alguna manera asumo por hecho que, bueno, que normalmente trabajamos con personas que saben lo que es la improvisación, que trabajan en contextos de improvisación, que tienen la escucha educada para improvisar, pero trabajar con niñas, por ejemplo, trabajar con personas mayores, trabajar con personas de contextos culturales muy diferenciados, dentro de lo humano, todavía manteniendo como esa humanidad tan ¿no? Como en un lugar central, no, nos da muchas pistas y
the same knowledge, and yet it gives us a lot of hints on how can we relate. This attitude is relevant because it moves us towards a discovery, many discoveries, and it's like a discovery of ourselves too, finding the human that lies within. And our observation sometimes ignores these essential aspects for a task. The task for empathy or co-creation or non co-creation or equality. Thank you, Kimber. I think that there are many questions regarding questions, interrogations when it comes to interaction between humans and animals or sentient beings. I believe this question is interesting, of who is improvising, or is there a subject who is improvising, because I believe there is improvisation is like an sfumato in painting. You sometimes cannot find a proper division between the subject object, but well, we are going to end the conversation here. I want to thank all the people on the panel, and let's hope Angel and Kimber can be present here in person.